and our good friend Scott Dochterman of the Athletic. And Scott, really interesting work on the genesis of the AQ plan from the Big Ten. A lot of times we don't know like how these things get put together. I've always been kind of a 5+11 guy, just because I just don't like the idea of what could happen in an AQ format. But the Big Ten does have some reasons for this. What was the most surprising for you as you got into why the 4-4-2-2-2-1, whatever it is? I'm probably lost in the math there a little bit.
Well, first, thanks for having me on. And I would say this, that hopefully at some point we get a new name for that, because math's not my strong point either, but, other than counting yards and points and that. But I think I wouldn't say it surprised me, but when I went through the math as to how these leagues are constituted now and what would have happened if under that automatic qualifier system the Big Ten has proposed, and the SEC has as well, just as talking themselves out of it, versus straight top 16 goes along the champions go, is that it actually would cost the Big Ten a couple of spots, and the Big 12 would be the beneficiary of this based over the last few years, because last year the Big 12 would not have gotten another team in. It would have been left out. It only would have had one under a 5-11 format. It would have had two, of course, if it had two protected ones. And so I think in some ways that is part of why I think it's not the worst idea in the world. When you do look, the Big Ten would have had at least 4, if not 5 teams every year. The SEC, the first 2 years would have only had 3, which kind of surprised me. And then the last few years would have picked that up. But overall, I think the math has been kind of interesting to me, because even though it just sounds almost highbrow and arrogant to say we deserve 4, that's really not the intent. The intent the Big Ten kind of shared, people in the Big Ten have shared with me, is that they feel like if they don't have this type of qualifier format, you have the Big Ten and Big 12 with 9 regular season games, you have the SEC and ACC with 8, that it's just so different when you're comparing one another to get all the way into 16, that it'll just be a race to the bottom when it comes to scheduling. And teams will say, you know what, instead of playing that crossover game against a Big 12 team or an SEC team, we're just going to play an FCS team or a group of 5, and that way our 10-2 gives us a better chance than a 9-3, no matter who the opponent is. So I think there's a lot of nuance to it. It's not as cut and dried. It's not as again, Big Ten's evil, Big Ten's arrogant as it is just kind of almost a rational plan to kind of divide college football, because everybody's so different.
So how surprised were they last week when Commissioner Greg Sankey gets up and just starts talking to folks last week and starts going, well, maybe we are going to look at this other thing? And because in talking to people yesterday, it seemed like this was pretty much like a done deal, right? And then last week occurred, and it seems like they kind of flipped everything on its head.
The 4-burner, side-burner, side-sear burner with Clearview glass stainless steel grill from Monument Grills. Made of tempered glass, which is strong, insulated, and allows you to check your grilling without lifting the lid. Our porcelain-coated cast iron cooking grids offer a large cooking surface of 513.3 square inches, primary cooking area, with even heat cooking. The Monument Grills include LED control knobs and are easy to light with pilotless electronic ignition. Better grilling, better value, Monument Grills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I haven't been to Destin, but I know about it when it happens every spring, and it's kind of a circus, if you will. It's kind of like the SEC Media Days, just a little different as far as the access to people. And so AD started talking, Sankey talked every day and kind of started flexing a little bit. And that was a little unusual considering, they're not doing it from a position of strength right this very minute. I mean, the Big Ten has won the last 2 national titles. The SEC was 1-5 against the Big Ten in postseason competition. So, and again, they're going over an 8-game schedule versus a 9. So the Big Ten people were very much surprised. They thought that they were kind of in lockstep, that there were things to iron out, but they felt like they were in it kind of together, and now they don't know. And, one AD that I talked to yesterday, from around the Big Ten was like, well, the thing is, we're not going to settle this week or next week. It's going to take a couple months. So we'll everybody have patience. We'll kind of take a step back, and then we'll talk about it and work things out. So but this is what happens this time of year. When somebody gets arrested or some plan happens like this, or there's expansion or realignment, it gets moved to the forefront really quick in the public's eye.
Scott, do you think that they can, they would be wildly successful in a 5-11 model, and they could live with it, right? Like, would it be something that they would do, but then would they fight it like all along the way and waiting for that moment to happen where maybe they and the SEC both got screwed at the same time, and they could say, see, we told you that, this could end up with both of us having less than 4.
I think that they would do that if the SEC plays 9 games, and if there's some sort of an agreement where they would play try to play 10 power conference opponents. That's not an issue for the Big 10 or Big 12. Almost every school plays 10 power conference teams, and they play 9 within their conference. So those teams are kind of on a similar plane when you look at it that way. But some of the numbers that are really kind of almost crazy as you think about it, over the last 5 years, 66 Big 10 teams have played at least 10 Power 5 opponents, Power 4, whatever, Power Conference. Only 12 played less than that. In the SEC, it's almost completely reversed. Only 11 teams over the last 5 years played at least 10 Power 5 conference teams. And when you look back at the history and why there's some PTSD on the Big Ten's side, is that you look back at Ohio State in 17 and 18, and they played 9 league games. They went to Iowa and got murdered. They went to Penn State and got throttled. Purdue, I should say, and got throttled. And if they were playing an 8-game schedule, they wouldn't play that cross-division game. That might have been a game that they put off in a different year, and instead they're filling their schedule up with directional Michigan school, and maybe they're 11-1, maybe they're 12-0, and they get in the playoff. But instead, the extra game cost them. Where you look at, again, at the SEC, that, and you guys know this too from the Big 12. You go anywhere in mid-November. Within your league, you can go to Iowa State. Found out that with Kansas last year. You risk a lot playing league competition at that time of year, and if you've got that mid-December or mid-November layup, it really helps you out. And then all of a sudden you're going, well, they're 10-2 and you're 9-3, and it's like, but our 9-3 is different than their 10-2. But it's never really worked out in the Big Ten's favor. So I think that's kind of why if everybody's gonna have different standards, then each conference should figure out what their number is, as opposed to a committee which changes every year or two and sees things differently.
I don't remember the printouts Greg Sankey gave out last week, but I don't think those numbers that you just put were on there. I don't think those were on there because those are very interesting numbers. When it comes to the ACC, and as you mentioned, the Big 12 there, they have more say than a lot of their counterparts, not named the Big 10 and the SEC. They have a voice at the table, so to speak. But how much do you think that voice really factors in and matters in the big picture? Or is it just Sankey and Petiti are going to do what they want no matter what? How much are those other voices valued, do you feel like?
They're very much valued. They don't get final say, which is the way the world has changed, and that's a little unfortunate. But one of the things that I think both Sankey and Petiti believe and have said at different times is, look, we have a responsibility to the sport to make it right, and we can't just do something that's just for the good of the Big Ten or just for the good for the SEC. Yes, we want to have every advantage we can have, but you've got to be responsible to the sport. And I think in some ways this is probably where there is some inequality among the leagues, and that's unfortunate. And if the four auto bids for both the Big Ten and SEC goes through, if I'm Jim Phillips, with the ACC, if I'm Brett Yermark with the Big 12, maybe you get together and say, look, let's push for 5 automatic bids combined, 2 for each of the conferences, and then the next team. So that way you're guaranteed a pretty good number out of the mix, because granted, they've lost some really good teams over the time, but if you can get 5 in every year, either in the big combined with the Big 12 and ACC, then you've got a fighter's chance, and hopefully that would be my push, or what I think could happen that could really end some of the stalemate here.
Were you surprised that they didn't just go go along with the 2 guaranteed? I know it's a matter of perception. Like, that's the driving forces. They don't want to be relegated publicly, which is basically what that would do. But do you think anybody was surprised that they weren't like, well, 2 is guaranteed? Like, we wouldn't have had that last year. So, yeah, let's go for it. Or was that kind of expected, do you think?
I think they're going to publicly go against this as long as they can because of perception, as you said. I mean, like the ACC is pretty much, on that 4-year stretch, they would have gotten 2 every year but 1. They would have gotten 3 last year, with Miami being the 3rd. So they're pretty much in that category. And they would have gotten 2 guaranteed and then 1 at large last year. The Big 12 would have been a little more volatile, and some of it's hard to compare with old Pac-12 teams and Cincinnati going to the playoff one year, but they would have been, 1 year would have been 3 or 4, and but the last 2 years it would have been only 1. So I think it's a guarantee. I think it's something that they could probably put in their pocket and just say, well, how much more could we push to make sure we get this right? And I think but you've got to be cautious because, talking from the Big 12 perspective is, can your 10-2 team then be, outrank a 9-3 team from the Big 10 or or the SEC when they're playing those teams, and you want to make sure that you get at least 2 every year. You get your champion, and then you're probably, last year after Iowa State's loss, it probably would have been BYU that would have been the second team. In fact, it was ranked a little higher, but you got to make sure you get 2 in. So I would hold the line for a little while, see if you can get anything else, but then cut bait and say, hey, as long as we can get 2 in every year, we feel pretty good about this.
Scott, do you sense a mistrust of the committee like the SEC clearly has now? Because that was some of their rhetoric. But the Big Ten in this format would really kind of probably want the committee, wouldn't they?
The Big Ten, the problem that they've had with the committee, of all things, it happened over a bowl game that really spelled it out. And this was, going back to 10 years ago, Jim Delaney laid out a plan where that's when they boosted from 8 to 9 games in the conference season. A championship game, 1 non-conference major opponent, and then no FCS opponents. That's the rules that he had put through, and that's what he wanted his teams to do. Well, I think it was in 2018, Penn State had a 9-3 record, as did Florida, but Florida played 2 FCS opponents. They played Colorado State, was like 3-9, and then Florida State, like they always do, and it was 5-7. They'd only beaten like 2 ranked opponents, and lost a couple other games decisively. I think 3 games by 20+ points. Penn State played the ACC Coastal Division champion. They played an 11-2 App State. They also played a 9-game league schedule with Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, 2 teams ranked in the top 5, and they were still ranked behind Florida. And so at that point, that's when Delaney just threw everything out. He was pretty upset. He just said, look, any criteria we have is secondary to the eye test at this point, and because they're playing 8 league games, we're playing 9, we're playing all these other teams. So I think the Big Ten would rather have it outside the purview of the committee. I mean, last year you take Illinois. I mean, Illinois was not a great team in the regular season, but you look at who they lost to. They lost to Oregon, Penn State, and then an 8-win Minnesota team, and then went and beat South Carolina in a bowl game. And you think about it, it's like they weren't even discussed. But if they're beating South Carolina, who was heavily upset that they didn't make the playoff, I think they'd rather be able to ensure it themselves, which is why they're really wanting, and they're going to do, no matter what, that plan where they have a 3-6, 4-5 game to go along with their championship on championship weekend.
Do you think that the Big Ten would be amenable to I talked about it earlier, because the SoCon came out today and said it needs to be more metric based and that the committee needs to be less involved, and we probably don't need to go all metrics and no committee, but would they be open to how they pick the hockey, which is both? Like, the committee can only consider teams that hit these certain metrics and have this certain RPI.
From what I was told, that they'd be willing to do they would be willing to look at the numbers, but then they're also like, look, we don't have as many data points as there is in basketball or other sports. You have 31 games roughly in college basketball, and there's some crossover. But now, you're basically talking about the law of transitive property. When you're talking about comparing teams in football, it's like I have a 9-3 team, you have a 9-3 team. Both of them lost all 3 games in conference play. Whose conference is better? Who played who? And then you're trying to say, well, we beat this team, which beat that team, which beat their team, and it really is hard to determine, and it all depends on each week, because we're talking college football, we're talking about young men out there, and some days they look really good, and other days they don't look as good, and who knows why. But so that's why they would rather, with 18 teams in the Big Ten, 16 in the Big 12, 16 in the SEC, and 17 in the ACC, they would rather just, this is the Big Ten's preference, is, hey, if we're going to get 4 spots no matter what the field looks like. We'd rather determine them for ourselves, because like one person said inside, he goes, Indiana was 8-1 last year. They played both the contestants for the championship game the year before. Then they played the other 2 last year, but we didn't know if they were better really than Illinois, even because of some of the other games they played. And so that's why they feel like the Big Ten does, that they would rather have it to where they determine who the 4 were. And then if somebody loses, then they can go to the at-large pool. And if they get in, they do. If they don't, too bad.
I also realized last week, after Greg Sankey spoke so much, that I don't know what Tony Petitti's voice sounds like. I have no idea what it sounds like. Honestly, like, he could be British for all I know. Like, seriously, like, I remember seeing Gary Oldman on David Letterman one time, like way back in the day, and then he was British, and I realized I'd seen so many Gary Oldman movies where he never had the same accent. I didn't know where he was from. This is kind of the exact opposite. Why is Tony Petitti so I don't want to say afraid. I mean, but why is his
calculated?
Calculated, yeah. Why is the strategy to not say anything, especially when this is your plan?
Exactly. That is their fault. And that's something that I've discussed with them. And his preference is, we'd rather just continue to work behind the scenes, not really, do this publicly. But, I'm like, look, everybody else is taking the narrative right now. You're losing. You're looking like the big, bad, arrogant Big Ten, that has this evil plan to guarantee spots, and they're not. And you need to come out and talk about it. And they're just like, well, right now, this is our preference to do it this way. And I don't understand that philosophy. I think you'd want to be out there kind of beating your chest saying, hey, we won the last 2 championships. We won some pretty significant bowl games. This plan is equitable for everybody. And again, use the figures that I gave you about the Big 12 or some of the other leagues, and say, look, the SEC still would have gotten 6 teams in last year. I mean, they still would have gotten Bama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina in. There's really no detriment to this plan. It's just a matter of how we proportion it. But I'm not the mouthpiece of the Big Ten, even though I sound like it right now. And I'm just trying to explain their perspective. But they got to come out and start talking, because, they had a position of strength a couple of months ago. Now it's starting to look like a position of weakness. Yeah,
I mean, it's just like if you walked in and said, whose plan is this? And they're like, somebody's. Yeah. Like that's what it's like. It looks your handwriting. Like, I don't know about that. Like it's so weird to me that they're not, especially considering that everyone else is speaking out against them right now. Like they've not defensed it at all. And obviously their beef on the 9 games is with the SEC. Is it also with why does nobody, you brought up the ACC. We always bring up the ACC. Why does no one ever bring up that they're in this too with the 8 games? And if there's the conference that could use another marquee game on their television schedule, it is definitely the ACC.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's weird. They've kind of slid under the radar because a lot of them, I think 4 of them play against that crossover game against the SEC late in the year. And they haven't been, frankly, good enough for it to really enter that conversation. And if they did, then, I mean, Florida State does, Clemson does. They've had, history there. But Virginia Tech has been down for a long time. And, some other teams that you think might be good. Miami, it's been kind of the offseason champion for a while. And, you're kind of waiting for them to kind of rise to the forefront. But I'll say this too, that most of them do play. I think all but 4 do play 10 power conference teams. So if they're not playing each other, they're only playing 8 times, but they are playing power conference teams. It's just, probably the point that the Big Ten really raised with me multiple times, and it said, look, this gives us an opportunity to play meaningful non-conference games, whereas at a 5-11 it wouldn't as much, because what teams will see, and this is what will happen if everybody stays status quo and the SEC says, well, we're not gonna add another game. Why would we want to do that? We're the toughest conference in the country, blah, blah, blah. Then the Big Ten's going to say, well, why are we going to play a meaningful non-conference game when it only hurts us because we play 9 Big Ten games? So we're going to start again eliminating that. USC is going to say we're not going to play Notre Dame anymore. We're going to play Cal Poly or something like that. And then you start, Iowa says, well, you know what? We've got 9 league games. We're going to play Northern Iowa instead of Iowa State. And that's the trickle-down effect that they want to avoid, because if the Big Ten has 4 spots, if the SEC has 4 spots, then it doesn't matter if Iowa plays Iowa State and loses. It's like, well, you're competing with the Big Ten for those spots, not across the board. And it's kind of a race to the bottom is how one person described it to me.
Scott, where are you doing this interview from?
I'm at a coffee shop in North Liberty, Iowa.
Oh, I thought you might be at like a ballpark, because I heard the music in the background. I thought, oh, maybe he's out covering a ball game, and he was nice enough to turn the computer on for us. But thank you anyway. Thanks always, Scott, for jumping on. It was a great piece. It was very educational, and we needed somebody like you to write that, because, like I said before, the Big Ten hasn't told us why they came up with the plan.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, I kind of noticed that after last week. I'm like, everybody's jumping on kind of the SEC's bandwagon on this. And it's like, well, I have some information and some people have told me this stuff. Let's just, and I pressed them. I even pressed them. They said, you guys want to go on the record for this? And no, that was not the case. So, but I felt like it was important to get this point of view out there, because again, it's not just the big bad ogres from Yankee land deciding to do something,
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Scott Dochterman of The Athletic.